recently, Ms. Jayapal, we have been in the midst of an impeachment investigation. She said that to Politico. But then in the very same story, the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes, said, no, we're not in an impeachment investigation. Then the gentleman from New York, Mr. Gregory Meeks, said, when asked if the House was investigating impeachment, he said, well, maybe we don't know whether the impeachment investigation has begun. It's just dizzying. Last week, it was the Judiciary Chairman, Jerry Nadler, who said, what we're doing is very clear. It's been very clear. It continues to be very clear. The Speaker has backed us at every point along the way. This process has been about as clear as Joe Biden's last answer to race relations that involved turning on the record player. We don't know where we are or what we're doing. Now, Mr. Lewandowski, as to what might be animating this bizarre circumstance. But those rules don't apply to you. So, Mr. Lewandowski, do you have a thought as to why we continue to engage in a charade that is overwhelmingly opposed by the American people and fundamentally misunderstood by my Democrat colleagues?
You know, Congressman, I think they hate this president more than they love their country.
Mr. Lewandowski, you were the campaign manager for the president's campaign when the Obama-Biden administration was notified that there might be efforts by the Russians to interfere with our election. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And can you describe for us the briefing you got as the campaign manager to ensure that our system was resilient and American democracy was protected?
There was no briefing provided by anybody from the Obama-Biden administration, members of the intelligence community, or the FBI to our campaign when I was present, or during my tenure as a campaign manager.
That's just baffling to me. I mean, our democracy is so precious. We have to cherish it. We have to protect it. And yet when the Obama-Biden administration knew that there might be nefarious efforts to interfere or co-opt or in any way disturb our democracy, they didn't say anything to you. Now, as you sit here today, having watched these facts unfold, do you have any rationale as to why maybe the Clapper, Brennan, Comey, Obama, Biden team didn't want to give the Trump campaign a fair defensive briefing about the threats that we were facing?
It's actually unfathomable to me that they didn't contact the major political nominee for president of the United States and inform them of potential threats against the election process in 2016.
And we could be finding that out now. I mean, we could have those people before our committee to figure out what in the world happened that didn't allow us to get those answers. One final question for you, Mr. Lewandowski. Has an inspector general employed by the United States government ever accused you of breaking the law?
No.
No, but they have done that with James Comey, and yet the leadership of this committee will not bring James Comey before, even though the Inspector General said that his work impaired the credibility and efforts of over 35,000 FBI agents and the brave people fighting for our country. It's a shame that you're here, Mr. Lewandowski. Jim Comey should be sitting in that chair. He should be answering questions about why he did so much damage to the FBI in our country, including not giving you the briefing that you were entitled to. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Nadler. Before I begin, let me remind you, Mr. Lewandowski, that this is not a Republican primary campaign. You are not on the campaign trail yet. This is the House Judiciary Committee. Act like you know the difference. You've never worked for the Trump White House in any official capacity, correct?
That's right.
But you do speak with President Trump with some regularity, true?
I think it's a fair statement.
In fact, during the summer of 2017, according to testimony to the special counsel, you were summoned to the White House by President Trump on at least 2 occasions, correct?
I don't believe the report says that, Congressman.
Okay, well, you met with the president one-on-one on June 19th, 2017, and then again on July 19th, 2017, correct?
Yes, I believe that's accurate.
Okay, let's try to get some clarity on what exactly you do for Donald Trump, since you're not a government employee. You stated during the 2016 Republican National Convention that I got the reputation as a tough guy. That's my reputation. You recall making that statement, Mr. Lewandowski?
I don't.
Okay. It's in the public record. Your job is to be Donald Trump's political enforcer, correct?
No, I don't believe so.
Let me ask the question another way. Are you the hit man, the bag man, the lookout, or all of the above?
I think I'm the good-looking man, actually.
Okay. President Trump told you on June 19, 2017, to personally deliver a message to Attorney General Sessions that would do criminal investigation into the Trump campaign, correct?
I don't believe that's what the Mueller report states, no.
President Trump wanted Attorney General Sessions to limit the special counsel's investigation to future incidents of election foreign interference, true?
Which page is that on, Congressman?
That's record. It's in this hearing. It's in the Mueller report. Now, the White House has a legal protocol for presidential statements. Under the Presidential Records Act, they must preserve all memos, letters, emails, papers, like the note he dictated to you. So you wrote down the president's message, which you then stored in a safe in your home. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay. You told the special counsel that was your standard procedure with sensitive items, correct?
Where's that reference in the report to you sent?
92. Asked you
Did you say page 90, Congressman?
The president asked you to reclaiming my time. The president asked you to record a message from him on June 19th because he wanted to hide his message from eventual disclosure. Isn't that right?
No.
Okay. But you never delivered the message to Jeff Sessions after that 19th meeting, true?
That's accurate.
Instead, you testified that you went on vacation, correct?
I did.
How long was your vacation, Mr. Lewandowski?
Oh, it was lengthy. I think at least 2 weeks.
At least 2 weeks. But you were summoned again to the White House on July 19th, 30 days after the original June 19th meeting, true?
I believe that's accurate, yes.
So you weren't on vacation the entire time, correct?
Well, I didn't stay I was on vacation the entire time. I was on vacation for 2 weeks, Congressman.
Right, but you still failed to deliver the message, and it had nothing to do part to your so-called vacation. Now, the July 19th meeting occurred just a few days after new information came to light about Russian operatives meeting with high-level Trump campaign officials. When you're summoned to the White House after that July 19th meeting, by that time, you still hadn't delivered the message to Jeff Sessions. You said to the president you would do it soon, according to Volume 2, page.
If that's what the report says, that's accurate.
Okay. President Trump also asked you to deliver a message to Attorney General Sessions that if he didn't do what was requested, he would be fired. Correct? Volume 2, page 93.
I think that's what was reported, yes.
Okay. President Trump wanted you to intimidate Attorney General Sessions, correct?
But you'd have to ask President Trump that.
Okay. Now, you stated earlier today that President Trump asked you to take down dictation, quote, many times. Is that correct?
It is.
But on page 91, volume 2 of the Mueller report, it states, quote, the president then asked Lewandowski to deliver a message to Sessions and said, quote, write this down, close quote. This was the first time the president had asked Lewandowski to take direct dictation. The first time.
Those are not my words, Congressman. Those are the investigators' words.
Right. Did you lie to Bob Mueller, or are you lying to us?
I didn't lie.
Okay. You're not really here to tell the truth. You are here to participate in a continuing cover-up. Russia interfered with this election in sweeping and systematic fashion. The Trump campaign welcomed that assistance at the highest level. There were subsequent acts of obstruction of justice with respect to the investigation. The American people deserve to know the truth.
Mr. Chairman, gentleman yields back. Gentleman.
I think I was 19 seconds over to help you, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, my colleague, Mr. Jeffries, just started that last line of questioning with a sort of an admonition to you. He said, this is the House Judiciary Committee and not a political forum, and it would be nice if you recognize that. I think it'd be nice if all the members of this committee would recognize that, because that's the reason that this has turned into such a farce. It's been said so many times today. This committee is so important to the country. It has one of the broadest jurisdictions over so many critical issues that are facing the country. You referenced some of this in your opening statement. And I, among many of my colleagues, are ready to get to that work for the American people. But we're here today. There hasn't been any fireworks. Oh, there's a lot of disappointed people around, operatives around the country who are really hoping that there'd be fireworks, but we're not surprised at all. I have a couple of questions just for clarification for the record, but first, is there anything that's been said here, any question that you've been asked about, or something that you would like to provide further comment on, just to clarify the record?
No, sir.
All right, in questioning today, is any new allegation or issue or fact not already investigated by the House and Senate Intel Committees or the Special Counsel's Office?
Not to the best of my knowledge.
Do you have any more information on any other matter related to either collusion or obstruction that you can offer to this committee that you have not already shared with Congress or the Special Counsel's Office?
I don't believe I have any new information.
In your prior testimony to the Special Counsel, is it true that you answered every question asked of you truthfully and to the best of your ability and your recollection?
To the best of my recollection, I did answer truthfully, yes.
A couple of things just for further clarification. We're afraid that some of this record will be obscured today, so these will just be quick rapid fire. Do you agree there is no evidence the president intended to obstruct justice?
I do.
Do you agree he has been harassed politically since the day he took office?
Yes, I do.
Do you agree that the president's supporters have received vastly different treatment than the supporters of Hillary Clinton?
Unequivocally.
You've called this a witch hunt, and I wonder if you'd like to elaborate on that any further.
I think that this fake Russia collusion narrative is the greatest crime committed against the American people, if not ever. This is a president who was duly elected by the American people, and members of certain bodies refuse to accept those election results. If this were done by a different president to a different party, the same way it was done to Donald Trump, that person would already be thrown out of office and people would be in jail. But when you support Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, there's a different set of rules. I think the American people find it very unfair, and there's been no accountability at the highest levels of the government to the Pfizer abuse applications which transpired, the spying on Americans clearly in violation of the Fourth Amendment, or the lives that were ruined because they simply wanted to support a candidate for president of the United States, and I think it's shameful.
We do as well, and that's a pretty good recitation of some of the issues that are keeping us up at night. Part of the thing that we're greatly concerned about is the American people's distrust now of our institutions. When people begin to doubt that the rule of law actually applies equally, that justice really is blind in this country, that we reach somewhat of a tipping point. It's very difficult to put that genie back in the bottle, and we're concerned. I know the Republicans and the conservatives on this committee are deeply concerned about the eroding faith in our institutions. I'm thankful that you've come to take the hostile fire today. I commend you for that. I commend you for your story being self-made. And one of the things I'm also concerned about is young people who are watching this who may have a disincentive to get into politics and to serve their country in this way because of this abuse that they've suffered. Yield to Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Real quick, Mr. Lewandowski, you know why you didn't get a defensive briefing from the FBI?
I do not.
I got a good idea. I think they were trying to trap the president. Page 17 of the Inspector General's report points this out. January 6, 2017, they go up to the Trump Tower when it's President-elect Trump, and they're trying to set him up about a pending investigation. All the while, Mr. Comey's been telling the president, you're not under investigation. Of course, they didn't give you a defensive briefing during the campaign or even up until that date, because they were trying to set him up. But we can't ask about that because Mr. Nadler hasn't even thought about when he's going to bring Mr. Horowitz in to answer our questions. He'd rather subpoena you, even though you're willing to come voluntarily. That's the problem. I thank the gentleman for his good line of question. Thank you for yielding. I yield back.
Thank you, gentleman from Ohio, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, in between your first meeting on June 19th and your second meeting with the president on July 19th, you went on vacation. And also during that time, there was public reporting about the Trump Tower meeting, correct? This is on page 92.
If it's in the report, I believe it to be accurate.
On July 19th, when the president for a second time asked you to deliver the message to Sessions, you said, and I quote, the message would be delivered soon, page 93. Correct?
Page 93.
But you didn't. You didn't call Jeff Sessions. You didn't try to meet with him. So the president asked you twice in the Oval Office to deliver a secret message to the Attorney General, a message that you quickly wrote down word for word at the president's direction, correct? Sir?
I believe I wrote it down.
And when you worked for the president during his campaign, did you ever ignore or disobey directions from candidate Trump?
I didn't believe it to be in order.
Just to be clear, although you were not working for the president in any capacity, you wanted to give the president you were going to follow his orders, correct?
No.
Well, you said, I'm going to take care of it.
Is that referenced in the report?
Did you tell the president you were going to deliver the message?
I can't comment on private conversations
sir,
with the
it's
president
on
to preserve
page-
executive privilege.
I'm sorry?
I can read you the exact statement again if you'd like me
Well,
to. I said the White House has directed that I not disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch
You're not going to
confidentiality.
stonewall me in my questioning.
Would you like
Your
me to
head
answer your
must have
question?
been spinning. You're here with the president of the United States in the Oval Office. He's directing you to deliver a message to the chief law enforcement officer in the United States, which you understood would effectively end the ongoing investigation into this president and his campaign. So you told the president that the message would be delivered soon. But then, this is on page 93, you immediately following the meeting with the president, you gave Dearborn the message the president had dictated to be delivered to Sessions, correct?
I believe that's what the report says.
And you didn't tell the president that you'd already asked Dearborn to deliver the message. You just said it would be delivered soon. This is on page 92, correct? It's on page 92. You didn't want to tell the president that you were passing off his message to someone else, did you? You knew he wanted you, he had described as his enforcer, a loyal soldier, to do it because the president trusted you. Isn't that right?
That's a question for the president, sir.
Then, well, why didn't you then deliver the message to Mr. Dearborn, to Jeff Sessions directly? Why did you give it to Mr. Dearborn to do?
I think I've testified I was out of town.
For 2 weeks.
Yes, I don't live in town,
Okay.
Congressman.
Did you, Mr.
Unlike you, sir, I don't live in town.
During your second meeting in the Oval Office, the president told you that if Sessions wouldn't meet with you, to tell him he was fired. Did you, Mr. Lewandowski, ever threaten the Attorney General that if he didn't meet with you, he would be fired?
No.
Did you tell Mr. Dearborn to tell Sessions that he would be fired if he didn't take this meeting as the president directed?
Congressman, the White House has directed I not disclose the substance of any discussion with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
The reason you didn't tell the president that was because you know that it was wrong. And the president, isn't that correct?
No.
Well, the president wasn't aware that you ignored his directive to tell Jeff Sessions he was fired if he didn't meet with you, was he?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'll move on. In fact, to prove to the Attorney General that the threat was real, 4 days later, on July 22nd, the president directed Priebus, his chief of staff, to obtain Sessions' resignation. That's on the slide in front of you. The president told Priebus that he had to get Sessions to resign immediately. Did you know that?
No.
This evidence as a whole strongly suggests that the president was reinforcing to Sessions that his job was on the line at the same time as the president believed you were delivering the message to end the investigation into the 2016 campaign. All of this made everyone very uncomfortable, including Mr. Dearborn, which is at page 93. And he told you that he was uncomfortable being a messenger to Sessions, correct?
No.
Well, were you aware when you asked Rick Dearborn to deliver this message to the Attorney General on behalf of the President of the United States, it created the same legal culpability for you as that you delivered the message yourself? Are you aware of that?
Congressman, the president didn't ask me anything illegal and he never asked me to keep anything a secret.
Are you aware that when you asked Mr. Dearborn message to end the investigation and just focus on future investigations, you thought you were protecting yourself, but you were in fact committing a crime? Rick Dearborn knew delivering the message was wrong. You knew it was wrong. That's why even after being asked to deliver it and saying you'd handle it soon, you passed it off to him and you never followed up. And guess what? I also think it's very, very wrong. In fact, I think the president asking a private citizen to try to scare his attorney general into ending the investigation into the president's conduct is obstruction of justice, plain and simple. I yield back.
The gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
I don't believe there was a question.
Very well. The gentleman from Arizona is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, thank you for being here today voluntarily. You know, you've heard slanderous attacks on you. You've had people refer to you as a gutted fish. You've had people refer to you as a chicken. You've had people imply that you're here to lie. That's unfortunate, and it's beneath this committee, quite frankly. We're here. Ostensibly, they tell me that they want to hear the truth. You're here to tell the truth today, right, Mr. Lewandowski? And in fact, you've given lots of testimony. You've told the truth repeatedly. I see a list of 302s when you were talking to the FBI, right?
Yes, sir.
And those 302s, they didn't record that. Those are after notes, right?
I believe that's right.
You gave testimony to the intelligence committees of both houses, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And so here you sit here today, and you gave testimony to, and you gave interviews, I think roughly 20 hours worth of interviews to the Mueller team, right?
Yes, sir.
And if we look at this Mueller report, we see your name in various places throughout the Mueller report, right? Fair enough?
I've never read the report, but I think that's accurate, sir.
You're not unwise to not have read the report.
Nobody's actually read the report, but that's okay.
Yeah, I've read the report.
You're the one. We've been looking for you.
Yeah, I'm the one. And your name is all over this report. But oddly enough, when you were asked by a member of the other side to look at volume 2, page 86, and they wanted you to testify to it, you might be surprised. Your name's not even mentioned on that page. You know that? You're not even mentioned there. They were asking you questions to comment about things where your name's not even there. Did you know that?
No, sir.
That same person then asked you to talk about page 49 and 50, volume 2. Guess what? Guess whose names don't appear there? Yours. Did you know that?
No, I did not.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Odd, isn't it, that they would be asking you to comment on pages that you weren't even there. So let's talk a little bit more about some of what members of Congress have done. They've spent 2 years claiming without evidence that then candidate Trump and the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. As a member of the campaign, you've responded today. How do you respond? Would you like to expand on that again today?
During my tenure at the campaign, Congressman, as I said in my opening statement, never do I believe I had any interaction with any foreign agents, foreign agencies, or foreign governments who are attempting to impact the outcome of the election. I've said very publicly, if anybody did attempt to impact the outcome of the election in a legal manner, I hope they spend the rest of their lives in jail.
Yeah, so we know that on January 2019, on the Chris Matthews show, a member of this committee was asked, do you believe the president right now has been an agent of the Russians?
That was me.
That member said, yes. Chris Matthews followed up and said, an agent like in the 1940s working for a foreign power? That individual responded, he's working on behalf of the Russians, yes.
Still believe that.
And, you know, Mr. Chairman,
The gentleman from
Arizona's got the time.
Arizona has the time.
I'd like 10 seconds added back on. He's
You have
going to
10
interrupt.
seconds in any event.
So, as a close friend, personal, and advisor of the president, member of the Trump campaign, how do you respond to that accusation by a member of this committee made months and months ago, even before the Mueller report came out and said there was no collusion or coordination?
You know, Congressman, I find it beneath the dignity of the President of the United States to accuse somebody of that. And while I didn't support President Obama when he was the president, didn't vote for him, I still wanted my country to be successful, so I wanted him to be successful. And I think those baseless accusations against our president are unfounded and unwarranted.
So I want to just cover the last little bit of this. We hear today lots of questions about the president regarding Jeff Sessions and some note that was dictated to you. That was after Special Counsel Mueller was appointed, wasn't it?
I believe it was, yes.
Did the president ask you to stop Mr. Mueller or to encourage Mr. Sessions to stop the investigation at any point?
President, Congressman, I can't speak to or disclose the substance of discussions with the president or his advisors to protect the executive branch confidentiality.
Appreciate that, but I will tell you, in going through this report, there is no evidence, no indicia that the president ever asked that you or Mr. Sessions stop the Mueller investigation. In fact, the Mueller investigation went on unimpeded. thousands of interviews, millions of documents. And with that, my time has expired, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Mr. Lewandowski, I'm going to put a slide up, and it's the words that President Trump dictated to you on July 19. Can you read what you wrote down?
I'm happy to have you read it, Congressman.
Well, why don't you want to read it, Mr. Lewandowski?
I think you should afford me the same privilege you afforded Director Mueller.
Would you like to read it?
No, you're welcome to read it.
Are you ashamed of the words that you wrote down?
President Swalwell, I'm very happy of what I've written, but you're welcome to read it if you'd like.
Are you ashamed to read it out loud?
I'm not ashamed of anything in my life, Congressman, are you?
Then why don't you read the words?
Congressman, I've asked and answered your
Mr.
question.
Lewandowski, why won't you read the words aloud?
I've asked and answered your question, Congressman. If you'd like to read the words, you're welcome to.
Well, you were ashamed to read them out loud, and you didn't deliver those words to the person the president asked you to. Did you have a consciousness of guilt?
I have nothing to be guilty of, Congressman. Thank
You
you.
still feel guilty today, and that's why you can't read it out loud?
Congressman, you're welcome to read the words if you'd like.
Well, I just wonder why you can't.
I have the capacity to, Congressman. I'll give you the privilege.
You said the president did nothing wrong. Why can't you read those words right now? Why can't you read them aloud?
Congressman, tell me why you hold me to a different standard than previous witnesses who sat here.
I want to give you one more opportunity to clear up something you said earlier. You've said a number of times it was in the Mueller report, it was accurate, except as it relates to you stating that this was the only time the president ever asked you to write something down. Are you saying that that part's not accurate? I'd ask to stop the clock while he confers with his lawyer.
Clock will be stopped for 5 seconds.
Could I see the page and reference number on that, Congressman?
Sure, it's page 91, lines 7 and 8. I will read it to you. This was the first time the president had asked Lewandowski to take dictation. Are you saying that that is not accurate?
I'm saying those aren't my words, Congressman.
I'm asking you, was that the first time the president asked you to take dictation?
And I've testified it's not the first time.
So this part would be inaccurate.
I'm saying I've taken dictation by the candidate and the president in the past.
Have you ever put any words that the president asked you to write down before in a safe? Or was this the first time you'd done that?
I believe it's my standard operating procedure when taking notes, Congressman.
So every note that you take of the president, you put in a safe? How big's that safe?
It's a big safe, Congressman. There's a lot of guns in there.
Is this the first time you've ever put a secret message from the president that he wanted you to deliver to someone else in the safe?
I don't believe there's anything secret about the message. I was never told to keep the message secret.
Is this the first time you ever put a message that the president asked you to deliver to someone else in the safe?
Not to the best of my recollection.
I want to go back to that day. Later, after the president asked you to deliver this message, he was interviewed by the New York Times. And the next slide shows that he said Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job. I would have picked someone else. That's not what the president said to you during that meeting in the Oval Office. Is that right?
The White House has directed that I not disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to
Mr.
protect
Chairman,
executive branch
Mr. Chairman,
confidentiality.
I'd like to stop the clock for a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
I would like to,
Stop.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to request a ruling on the witness's refusal to answer.
Mr. Lewandowski, when you refuse questions, you are obstructing the work of our committee. You are also proving our point for the American people to see. The president is intent on obstructing our legitimate oversight. You are aiding him in that obstruction. And I will remind you that Article 3 of the impeachment against President Nixon was based on obstruction of Congress. You are instructed to answer the question. The clock will start again.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlemen, clock will stop again. The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Is it correct, and I can repeat, or you can let me see your little sheet there, that reference you made to Nixon was after a formal inquiry was put to the House and then brought back to the Judiciary Committee? Your statement's a little bit different than this. Just wanted to point out truth for the record. I yield.
I have a parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
First of all, that was not a parliamentary inquiry. He didn't even ask anything. But who seeks? Gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Chairman, did you just threaten to impeach Mr. Lewandowski, private citizen?
No. The plain import of what I said was that he is violating the law by refusing to answer these questions. The president is violating the law by instructing him and others not to answer these questions. And Article 3 of the Nixon impeachment was based on this kind of obstruction of Congress by President Nixon.
One further inquiry, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman will state
An official impeachment that we're in.
I have stated repeatedly that this committee is, and we amended our rules to empower the chairman to designate specific hearings, which I did for this hearing, is pursuant to finding out, to determining whether we should vote articles of impeachment against the president. That's exactly what this is.
Thank you.
Gentleman from California, will continue.
Mr. Lewandowski, I'll ask you again. What's displayed on the slide is not what the president told you in that one-on-one meeting. Is that correct? Are you refusing to answer, Mr. Lewandowski?
No, Congressman, as I've explained in a letter from the White House dated September 16, 2019, to my attorney,
Mr. Lewandowski, that
Mr.
letter.
Lewandowski's conversation with the president
So,
and with senior advisors of the president protected from
we stop the
disclosure.
clock again for the.
Mr. Chairman, point of order, and I'd ask the clock be stopped.
Clock will be stopped and the
Mr. Chairman, I'd ask that this...
gentleman will state his point of order.
My point of order is, Mr. Chairman, this witness continues to obstruct the work of this committee by refusing to answer questions. He's been ordered to do so by you. I ask that you would judge him in contempt in these proceedings.
Point of order. That's not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
It was a point of order. It wasn't
I
a
will
parliamentary
take- I will-
inquiry.
excuse me. I will take that under advisement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlemen will continue.
Are you refusing to answer? Yes or no? I don't need you to-
Congressman, I'm happy to answer your question, so let me have the privilege to do so. As explained below, Mr. Lewandowski's conversations with the president and with senior advisors to the president are protected from disclosure by long set of principles
again,
protecting
Mr. Lewandowski,
executive
that's
branch
not an answer.
confidentiality.
Mr.
interests-
Chairman,
As a
that's-
result,
that's not
the
an
White House is directing Mr. Lewandowski not to provide information about such communications
I would
beyond
ask-
the information
Chairman,
provided in the portions of the
stop.
report that have already been disclosed to the committee.
Gentleman has the time, not the witness.
And Mr. Lewandowski, I'm just asking, if you're not going to answer, just say it's a refusal to answer. We don't need to be read the instructions from the White House. So I'm going to move on. In that New York Times interview hours after the president spoke to you, he never said, in fact, I just enlisted Mr. Lewandowski to deliver a secret message to the Attorney General for him to direct the special counsel to limit the investigation. He said to you something that he did not say just hours publicly. Is that right?
I have no idea what he said to the New York Times.
Mr. Lewandowski, would you agree that delivering a secret message in the way that this president did as a former law enforcement officer who's probably investigated gangs and mob-like behavior, that this is consistent with that?
I take exception to your premise of the question that it was a secret message.
Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Mr. Lewandowski, welcome to the Judiciary Committee. You and the president are accused by the majority of a cover-up of foreign collusion, but the Mueller team of partisans, try though they did, couldn't find any evidence of collusion. So since you stand accused of this crime, I'm just kind of curious, how do you cover up a crime that never happened?
It's a great question, Congressman. I don't know the answer.
You've been watching the crux of the majority's case. It's that the president asked you to suggest to the attorney general that he should say the president is being treated unfairly and had done nothing wrong. Is that essentially the accusation against you?
It seems to be, yes, sir.
Well, I think the record's pretty clear. The president was being treated unfairly and he had done nothing wrong. Yet it's upon this pretext that the Democrats feel justified to invoke impeachment. The solemn power reserved to the Congress for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. It's the power to nullify the constitutional election of the President of the United States by the American people. Does that sound like an abuse of power in this case to you?
It does.
Certainly does to me, too. For more than 3 years now, our nation has been torn apart by this monstrous lie that the President of the United States was a willing agent of a hostile foreign power. I'd like to ask you, where do you think this whole lie of Russian collusion started?
You know, Congressman, I don't have the facts on it, but I think when Inspector General Horowitz has the privilege of coming here and testifying, he'll testify that this began at the highest levels of the government and was perpetrated through the intelligence community to come up with a narrative of why Hillary Clinton lost the campaign as opposed to the real narrative of why Donald Trump won the campaign.
This actually began before the election. You do believe the U.S. government, through its
We'll bring before us James Comey, Clapper, and Brennan, and have them answer the questions under oath that seems to elude them so many times when they sit before these committees.
Oh, by the way, we have suggested to the majority that we need to do precisely that. And so far, all of those requests have fallen on deaf ears. But here's the picture that seems to be slowly taking shape as more and more information comes to light. We have a phony dossier produced by the Clinton campaign, and we have disinformation channeled to George Papadopoulos through Joseph Mifsud, who it turns out has a long history of involvement with Western intelligence agencies, including the CIA. Justify a sham investigation. That investigation was then leaked to the press to give credence to this false narrative. Is that what you see taking shape here with the evidence that's slowly coming out?
I think that's exactly right. And you look at the role that Bruce Orr and his wife Nellie Orr played at Fusion GPS, the culpability they have, the fact that they at least notified the FBI of the lack of credibility of Christopher Steele and the information that he was providing. Should give us great pause that such a small group of individuals at the FBI who comprised Crossfire Hurricane had the opportunity to set in motion a plan to try and prevent a person from being elected president of the United States with no evidence whatsoever.
I think the importance of this cannot be overstated. We entrust the most terrifying powers that the government possesses to these agencies, literally the power to ruin lives, to spy on, to incarcerate you, to launch pre-dawn raids on your home. The abuse of these powers for political purposes would be a direct threat to the most fundamental freedoms that we have as Americans and the most fundamental institutions of our democracy. I should think that that would be of some passing interest to everyone in this committee. Go back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Lewandowski, earlier in your testimony, you questioned the love that Democrats have for our country. I served on active duty in the United States military. I question my love of our country. I'm not going to question yours. We're all Americans. Now, earlier in your testimony, you had made a pretty stunning concession, which is that you had not read the Mueller report. That explains a lot about your testimony, and I'm thinking maybe you don't know what the special counsel actually found. So I'm going to tell you. Volume 1 of the Mueller report found that the Russians attacked American elections in a sweeping and systematic manner. It also found that the Trump campaign knew about the attack, that they gave internal polling data to the Russians, that they planned their campaign strategy around this attack. It's not just in the Mueller report, it's also in Robert Mueller's testimony under oath in front of the Intel Committee, as well as this committee. The reason we're here today is because Volume 2 finds that the president tried to obstruct that investigation into the Russian attack on at least 10 instances, 5 of which Robert Mueller found there was substantial evidence. So I'm going to put up a slide about what the special counsel found about this particular incident in which you're involved. He found substantial evidence that the president's effort to have Sessions limit the scope of the special counsel's investigation to future election interference was intended to prevent further investigative scrutiny of the president's and his campaign's conduct. So that's why we're all here today. And I think it's important to look at the timeline to understand how this all unfolded. You previously testified that in March 2017, that you were aware that Attorney General Sessions recused himself. He did that in March 2017. I'm going to put up a slide about what the White House counsel's office had directed about communications with Sessions. It said that Sessions should not be contacted, no contact with Sessions, and no serious concerns about that instruction. Did you ever get that instruction from anyone not to contact Sessions at all?
Clock is stopped.
No.
Thank you. A few months later, on June 14, 2017, the media reports that the obstruction investigation, actually that the Russia investigation turns into obstruction investigation into the president himself. And then when Donald Trump learns about this, he goes nuts. Isn't that correct?
I don't know that to be accurate.
The president launched over 10 tweets very shortly thereafter, calling the investigation a witch hunt. That's correct, isn't it?
I don't know that to be accurate.
He did. All right. So then he calls Don McGahn at home and says that Mueller has to go. Call me back when you do it. Were you aware of that he called Don McGahn at home to tell him to fire Mueller?
No.
Okay. 2 days after that phone call, the president calls you into his office. You admitted that he dictated a message for you to carry to Jeff Sessions. You said that you didn't give it to Jeff Sessions because you went on vacation. The Mueller report actually says that the Attorney General canceled that meeting. That's correct, isn't it? The Attorney General, in fact, canceled the meeting that you tried to give the note to?
Where is that reference in the report, Congressman?
Sure, it's on page 92. I'm going to give you the courtesy. I'm just going to read it for you. It says, Lewandowski called Sessions and arranged a meeting for the following evening at Lewandowski's office, but Sessions had to cancel due to a last-minute conflict. Do you remember that?
I believe that's accurate.
Okay, all right. And then a little bit later on July 8th, the media writes additional negative information about the president and his campaign, including that his senior advisors and his son met with Russian operatives who had dirt on Hillary Clinton as part of Russia and its government. Donald Trump then calls you back into his office again, alone for a meeting. And this time, he tells you that Sessions is going to be fired if he doesn't meet with you. Do you recall that conversation?
I took that as a joke.
Okay, you took that as a joke. After that, it's on TV, and he says Sessions should have never recused himself, and if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else. Do you think the president was joking when he said that on TV?
I don't know if the president's joking or not.
When the president met with you alone to ask if you delivered the note to Sessions, do you believe any of that was a joke?
I can't discuss a private conversation with the president. It isn't in the report, sir.
Okay. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Arizona.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Lewandowski, for being here today voluntarily. First we had the Steele dossier, which turned out to be a false opposition report funded by the Clinton campaign and the Democrat National Committee, and apparently was used to spy on the Trump campaign and initiate the special counsel investigation. Then for 2 years, we've heard from Democrats on TV, I heard it over and over again from some on this committee, that they had proof that the president had colluded with Russia. But then guess what? The Mueller report comes out and they lied. It was totally false. There was no collusion, no conspiracy. So then my Democratic colleagues had to switch gears because they knew that one failed. So they said, oh, now it's obstruction of justice. So they brought in Robert Mueller and they tried to question him. They did everything they could. That one flopped too. So now here we are today. They're hauling you in, and who knows who they're going to haul in next. They're trying everything and anything. And, I just don't know when it's going to end. I want to read a quote from on April 19, 2019, shortly after the release of the Mueller report, Emmett Flood, special counsel to the president, wrote about the abuses by executive branch employees. He said, in the partisan commotion surrounding the release report, it would be well to remember that what can be done to the president can be done to any one of us. Do you agree with this statement?
I do.
And Mr. Lewandowski, I have to tell you, I'm scared for our country. I'm scared when I read this Mueller report, when I read
C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government, created by cable in 1979.
As this one has had, but I appreciate you being here today. This hearing is yet another grand display of political theater that we have seen from this committee over the last several months. The majority should be focused on sound congressional oversight, in particular, the IG report about abuse in the FBI. And we should be having a hearing here soon with the Inspector General in front of us to question, but all we've seen for months is desperate attempts to keep this impeach at all costs narrative alive. I don't know what they're calling it today. Is it an inquiry? Is it an investigation? Is it a proceeding? Whatever word that Google Thesaurus throws back at them when they type it in, that's what we're at. It's embarrassing as a member of the Judiciary Committee to have you here to have to go through this, but the majority is propping up this Mueller report like a bad remake of Weekend at Bernie's. And it's impeachment based on the Mueller report is dead, and everybody seems to know it except the chairman and several members of the party conference, the majority. We should be hearing from the IG report about the FBI abuse. We are now hearing about the president's mood when he's talking to you in the Oval Office. There was collusion with Russia, but not by President Trump. I want to go back to questions by the gentleman from Florida, not the gentleman from Florida who's still standing by the belief, proven false by Volume 1 of the Mueller report, that President Trump is a Russian agent, but the gentleman from Florida, or gentleman from California who is asking you about the Steele dossier. You've heard of the Steele dossier, correct?
Yes, sir.
It's an opposition research document created by a man named Christopher Steele and paid for by the Clinton campaign and the DNC. Have you ever met Christopher Steele?
I have not.
But you're familiar with who he is. Christopher Steele was hired by a firm called Fusion GPS to produce the Steele dossier. Have you heard of Fusion GPS?
Yes, I have.
Well, that's one more than we had from Mr. Mueller during his testimony because he didn't know what Fusion GPS was. Do you know who hired Fusion GPS to produce the Steele dossier?
I believe it was a law firm, Perkins Coie.
And do you know who Christopher Steele's sources were he put in the dossier?
I don't have, I couldn't speak to it directly, sir.
But they were Russian sources, correct?
That's the public report, yes.
And the FBI and intelligence leaders did not verify the truthfulness of the allegations in the Steele dossier about Donald Trump, did they?
That's my understanding, sir.
Even though the information was never verified, most of it has been proven to be false, the intelligence community relied on it to get a FISA application to spy on the Trump campaign, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And all of this was laid bare in should have been laid bare, but Volume 1 clearly indicated that there was no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian government. That Mueller report that we are still propping up and hashing over week after week after week, you wrote an op-ed about back on March 29th when you clarified that you thought the report was comprehensive. You clarified that it found no wrongdoing by the president or his advisors, but that it is being used. It was being used back in March, and it is still being used by conspiracy-minded Democrats and a hostile media for their own political purposes, thwarting the president's reelection and pursuing further investigations. Do you stand by that op-ed, and do you still believe that it is being misused in that way today?
I do believe it, sir.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to the questions that have been answered or asked?
No, sir.
All right. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you. Mr. Lewandowski, what we're seeing here is a pattern of the president doing anything and everything to hide his misconduct from Congress and from the American people. The president tried to get you to deliver a secret message to the Attorney General, all in an attempt to prevent the special counsel from exposing the president's own misconduct. And as soon as the special counsel published his report and the president's misconduct was exposed, the president tried to cover that up too. Isn't it true that the president has repeatedly tried to discredit your and other witnesses' testimony to the special counsel in the published report?
Not to my knowledge.
You follow the president on Twitter, Mr. Lewandowski?
That's a good question.
Okay.
I'd have to check, but I think it's possible. I may be the only one who doesn't, but I'll fix that immediately. I'm sorry.
Excellent. You've probably seen his tweets, I imagine. Didn't the president say, and I'll put up the slide for you, statements are made about me by certain people in the crazy Mueller report, in itself written by 18 angry Democrat Trump haters, which are fabricated and totally untrue. That is a Trump tweet from April 19th, 2019. That's the president saying that all the statements given by witnesses in the investigation, all those statements are untrue. Mr. Lewandowski, you were a witness in the investigation. You sat for interviews with the special counsel as part of the federal investigation. Isn't that correct?
I did sit, yes.
And the special counsel's report includes statements that you made to the special counsel during the federal investigation. Did you lie at any point to the special counsel during those interviews?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
So your statements to the special counsel in the Mueller report, those are not, quote, fabricated and totally untrue. You didn't lie to the special counsel, did you, Mr. Lewandowski?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
So the president is wrong that the report is fabricated and totally untrue. That's just the president trying to discredit all of the witnesses who said that he obstructed justice. Isn't that correct, Mr. Lewandowski?
That's a question for the president.
Well, which is it? I mean, did you lie, Mr. Lewandowski? Or is the president wrong when he says that all of the statements in the report are fabricated?
I think I believe it says certain people. Statements made about me by certain people. It doesn't say all, unless I'm misreading it.
Mr. Lewandowski, did you lie to the president? And is the that everything in the report is fabricated?
I won't comment on private conversations, but I don't appreciate the insinuation that I lied about anything. And I've answered it multiple times. I've answered your question multiple times about my truthfulness to the committee and the special counsel's office.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Lewandowski. But
I have not, to the best of my knowledge, lied to the special counsel.
Mr. Lewandowski, this is my time. You are not yet in the Senate. You are a witness before the Judiciary Committee. Please act like it. This is my time. I control it. The president also said, and please put up this slide, watch out for the people that take so-called notes when the notes never existed until needed. Referring to the Mueller report, referencing people taking notes of meetings with the president, notes that documented the president's obstruction. Mr. Lewandowski, you had notes from your meeting with the president. You've testified to that before us, correct?
Yes.
You were dictated those notes by the president, correct?
I believe that's in the report.
And you told the special counsel the president's dictated a message to you, and you said, write this down. This is volume 291, page 91. And you gave those notes to the special counsel, correct?
I can't speak to the way the special counsel has conducted their investigation or what information they have.
Did you give the notes to the special counsel? This is not about how the special counsel conducted its investigation.
That's a
it's
question
about whether
for,
you gave the notes to the special counsel.
That's a question for Special Counsel Mueller.
Those were your notes, Mr. Lewandowski. They were in your safe. They were dictated to you and written down by you. Did you give them to the special counsel?
I comply with all legal and lawful requests of the special
counsel. Obviously, you are once again obstructing our investigation by refusing to answer questions that...
I've just answered your question. I said comply with all requests by the special counsel.
So you gave the notes to the special counsel?
I've asked and answered your question.
Did you make up that the president told you to write down that note, Mr. Lewandowski?
I can't speak to private conversation I might have had with the President of the United States.
Did you lie about the president telling you to write down the note?
That's not
a private conversation.
I believe what is in the report is an accurate description.
Okay, so to be clear, you also gave the special counsel notes from your meeting with the president that are not fabricated and totally untrue as per the president's tweet. So when the president said all those notes never existed until needed, that was his quote, that's just another instance of the president trying to discredit anyone who actually tried to document his misconduct. Now the president is going further, isn't he? You've said previously that you have nothing to hide and that you would answer all questions. Here's what you said. Can I play that clip?
I never asked for presidential immunity whatsoever. Chris, I sat there for 12 hours, and before I left, after the last 4 hours, I said, I will sit here for another 4 hours to answer every single one of your questions to the House Intelligence Committee. I said, before we leave today, I want to be very clear. I will sit and answer every one of your questions. There's no reason to subpoena me because I'm willing to volunteer. If they want to ask me questions, I'll be happy to answer their questions because I have nothing to hide.
It's interesting, Mr. Lewandowski, because obviously the president does have something to hide because the White House is directing you not to answer the questions in front of the Judiciary Committee. And that is a tremendously shameful thing, Mr. Lewandowski. The American people deserve to know the truth, and I think they deserve to have you answer our questions.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. the American people know the truth if they've read the Mueller report and have come to their own conclusions. You and the Trump campaign fully cooperated with the Mueller investigation. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And multiple times that you've been asked to testify voluntarily before numerous different congressional committees, you've complied in that request, even voluntarily, not even needing to be subpoenaed.
That's right, to the best of my recollection, yes.
And after 22 months, 18 lawyers, 500 subpoenas, 500 search warrants, the Mueller report concluded that there was no evidence that the Trump campaign colluded with Russia. Is that correct?
I haven't read the report, but I believe that's the final conclusion.
So now that we've established that the Mueller report itself doesn't find that there's any collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia, this whole contention about the president firing or not firing or directing people to fire, is it your understanding, and you may not be able to answer this because it's outside the scope, but is it your understanding in Article 2 of the Constitution that the president could fire the Attorney General without cause for any reason whatsoever?
Let me preface it by saying I'm not an attorney, but it's my understanding that the president has broad authority over members who serve in the executive branch and has broad latitude to hire and fire at his discretion.
And also under that constitutional authority obligated to him under Article 2, he could fire the FBI director without reason, for any reason whatsoever at any time.
Again, that could be a very realistic interpretation of the Article 2 powers that are provided to the President of the Constitution, yes.
And he could have also had Mr. Mueller fired during the course of the investigation if he wanted to under his powers under Article 2.
Again, I think that'd be a question for the Attorney General or White House counsel, but I believe that would be his prerogative if he so chose, yes.
So given all that, he did not choose to exercise any of that authority. In fact, he allowed for the campaign and members like yourselves to coordinate with them, cooperate with them. And until now that we've gone through a 22-month investigation where the American people have been sold a lie of Russian collusion, now we're going to just try to rehash this narrative amongst the American people, despite the fact that it has been investigated by investigators, lawyers, FBI agents for 22 months. I would be happy to yield to any other members of my caucus that would like to yield. If not, I'll yield back to the chair. Thank you for your time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Florida.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lewandowski, just for the record, I do love this country. I spent 27 years enforcing the law, and now I have the honor of writing the law. When special counsel visited us and in his testimony, he talked about a spectrum of witnesses who were either telling half-truths up to those who were outright liars. Today, I do have to wonder how many untruths, how many members of Congress neglecting their duties and their oath, and how many White House attorneys does it take to protect one innocent president? Mr. Lewandowski, you started off your testimony, or during your opening statement, you talked about being a certified police officer in New Hampshire. Is that correct?
Yes.
Do you believe that police officers have a very tough job?
I do.
But even with all of the stuff that law enforcement officers have to put up with, not only enforcing the law and patrolling their communities, but just working horrible hours, I'm sure you know about that. With all of that stuff, do you believe that law enforcement officers, when they engage in wrongdoing, that they should be held accountable?
I do.
Mr. Lewandowski, you said that if anyone were trying to coordinate with Russia, they should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. Is that correct?
I believe, Congresswoman, I said if anybody attempted to impact the outcome of the election illegally, they should spend the rest of their lives in jail.
So do you believe that a person coordinating with Russia should not be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law?
I think anybody who's attempting to impact the outcome of an election illegally, whether it's with Russia or any other foreign entity, should spend the rest of their life in jail.
Mr. Lewandowski, I know you know, and I believe, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt that you care about the special counsel's report concluding that Russia government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in a sweeping and systematic fashion. Do you agree with that conclusion?
I believe Russia attempted to influence the election, yes.
In fact, the report documents over 100 contacts between Russian nationals or those acting on their behalf and the Trump campaign, or those advising then candidate Trump. The report focused that those contacts with Russia, offers of assistance to the campaign, invitations for candidate Trump and Putin to meet in person. Mr. Lewandowski, you said you knew nothing about this. Is that correct?
I don't believe I had any conversation with any Russian or Russian contact.
You knew nothing about them offering assistance to the campaign at all?
I don't believe I have.
You said that
never spoken to a
I
Russian.
never spoke. I never contacted a Russian. I never coordinated with the Russian. I don't know anything about Russia, okay? I never spoke to them, and I was the campaign manager. Do you remember saying something similar to that?
I think
During the period of time, would that be a pretty close to what you remember saying?
it would depend on the time frame of the campaign we're speaking about.
When you served as campaign manager
Right.
of the Trump campaign?
There were multiple periods of time from.
Would you say that you had sole control over the campaign other than the candidate himself? Would that be
Not on the day I was fired, I didn't have sole control.
prior to that day?
Again,
That's
not leading up to.
There is nothing funny.
Not leading up to that day,
There
Congresswoman.
is absolutely.
You asked me a question, I'm
nothing
happy to give you an answer.
funny
If you don't like my answer, I
this
could
whole
rephrase it.
thing. Excuse me?
I said, if you don't like my answer, I could rephrase it. But no, I don't think I had sole control of the campaign the day preceding my firing, or the day I was fired, or multiple days leading up to that. So if you have a specific
So
time frame.
let's forget the firing. The first month that you were the campaign manager, would you say that you had sole control over the campaign other than the candidate himself?
Are you talking about in June of 2015?
So you talked to then candidate Trump pretty much on a regular basis, right? You've established that you talk to him on a regular basis. Is that correct?
Yes.
And out of being the campaign manager, being very close to the candidate, the campaign has over 100 contacts with Russia, and you didn't know anything about that.
That's correct.
Did you
To the
ever
best of my
ask?
knowledge.
Did you ever ask the president if he knew about his campaign's contacts with Russia after the reports came out that there were over 100 contacts? Did you ever ask him after those reports came out?
I'm sorry, did I ask who, Congresswoman? I missed that.
Did you ask Trump if he had ever had, did he know that the campaign had regular contact with Russians after the report came out? After you heard that report, those reports, did you ever ask him?
Expired, but the witness may answer.
Congresswoman, I couldn't disclose a private conversation I may or may not have had with the president.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California. Sorry. I'm sorry, the gentleman from Texas. California. Okay.
Nevada.
No.
Georgia. Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Mr. Lewandowski, I'm glad to hear that both of us share a deep love for this country and that both of us have a tremendous distaste for any foreign agents that may want to interfere with our democracy in this country. I'm going to ask you if you're familiar with George Papadopoulos.
I am.
And you agree that he was a foreign policy advisor for the Trump administration as of April 27, 2016?
To the campaign, Congressman.
The campaign, correct?
To the campaign.
Yes. As you know, George pled guilty to felony crimes, including lying to federal investigators. We've got his indictment up on the screen. And one of those things he pled guilty to was lying about how often he was communicating with Russia, when he was an advisor to the campaign. Correct?
I don't know if that's what he pled guilty to, Your Honor, sir.
It's in this slide. In fact, I'm quoting the Mueller report now. Throughout April 2016, Papadopoulos continued to correspond and meet with Russians and seek Russian contacts. And of course, that's up on volume 1, page 87, the slide. The report also documents Papadopoulos trying to schedule then candidate Trump to travel to Russia to meet with Putin. Is that correct?
I don't know what's in the report, sir.
The report also documents emails discussing this potential Russian trip, and I'll show them in case you've not read them, correct? You can put those up, please. On April 27th, the Trump campaign foreign policy advisor, Papadopoulos, again sent you, sir, an email telling you that he had, quote, been receiving a lot of calls over the last months about Putin wanting to host Trump and the team when the time was right. You know,
If that's what's in the report.
Volume 1, page 89.
Okay, so first I've seen it.
On June 1st, Papadopoulos forwarded you another email from a Russian official raising the possibility of meeting in Moscow, asking you if that was something that you wanted to move forward with. Is that accurate or not?
I don't know.
Volume 1, page 89. Slide, please.
I see the report, sir.
So I would say that this was not about you receiving information about coordinating potential meetings with Russia, but actually you responded to Papadopoulos, sending him to connect with Sam Clovis because he was going to be the running point man. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that to be accurate.
Okay. Did you tell Papadopoulos to stop communication with Russians?
I don't believe I did.
Okay. You actually encouraged that communication, correct? By referring him to a running point man, which is Mr. Clovis. Yes?
No, Congressman. What I was attempting to do with contact from Mr. Papadopoulos, who I had very limited interaction with, was to put him in touch with a staff person who could have a... Congressman, I don't believe I ever had a communication of any Russians trying to offer to interfere in the outcome of the election.
But you did have knowledge, sir, of people in your campaign communicating with Russians.
Time of the gentleman has expired. The witness may answer the question.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
The gentlelady from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, one of the things that has always caught my attention was the fact that campaign chairman Paul Manafort shared with a Russian operative, Mr. Kalemnik, the campaigns, and this is a quote from the report, strategy for winning Democratic votes in Midwestern states. That's in volume 1, pages 6 and 7. And that he shared with the Russian operative internal polling data on the campaign. Now, did you have any knowledge that Mr. Manafort was sharing internal polling data or the campaign's Midwest strategy with these Russian operatives? Did you know about that?
I did not.
So although it's been reported that you continued to advise the campaign even after you left and had an enduring presence, that was not something you were aware of.
Correct. I was not aware.
Well, I'm just interested, you know, all of us here, both Republicans and Democrats, have something in common. We've run for office, and we know a little bit how to do that. And one of the things that I think we all know is that internal polling data is generally something that you don't share broadly. You use it to base your campaign. Wouldn't you say that's correct, as a general rule?
I think it's a good general rule. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm mystified why the manager of the Trump campaign would choose the one thing that would allow the Russians, who were, we already know from other evidence, trying to influence this campaign, information that would allow them to guide their efforts, this internal polling data. Do you have any insight into that, why that would happen?
I don't know why Mr. Manafort would share that information.
It seems to me that, do you know whether the Russians asked for it?
I don't know.
Don't know. It seems to me that of all the things in the report, and there are many troubling things, that the Russians, and it's clear that they were trying to elect Donald Trump president. Actually, Putin has said that publicly since then. They received from the Trump campaign manager the internal polling data and the strategy to win in the Midwest with Democratic votes, not once, but repeatedly. At the same time, there were over 100 contacts, Russians and the campaign. Can't you understand that would raise some anxiety, those facts?
Just a point of clarification, Mr. Manafort was never the campaign manager.
Are you saying he was not involved in the campaign?
No, I'm saying he was not the campaign manager. Just as a point of clarification.
Chairman, manager, a person in charge of the campaign for a period of time. I just think that when you add it up, who would know about this other than Mr. Manafort? Can you tell us who else we need to call who would have the facts of this information?
Well, we know where Mr. Manafort is, and he's currently available for questioning, I think, if you're looking for him.
In addition to him,
Mr. Gates, potentially?
Mr. Gates might know about who initiated, whether the Russians were asking polling data or whether it was the idea of the Trump campaign itself to provide the polling data. That would be Mr. Gates would know that in addition to Mr. Manafort.
Yes.
Do you think that the president was advised of the day-to-day details of his campaign?
I don't think the president was advised of the minutia of the day-to-day details of the campaign, as probably most candidates are not advised of the day-to-day minutia.
What level of information was the president generally provided? Would it be, we've got a strategy to win the Midwest, or we're just hoping for the best? What would be the level of information generally that the president as a candidate would receive?
I can only speak to my tenure there and my conversation with him at the time about the information I would have shared. I would have basically shared his travel calendar for the next day or week so he'd understand where we were traveling to. I would share with him media opportunities if he wanted to be on or have the opportunity to be on a specific television show, and then messaging points of what we may want to be discussing during that tenure or time of the campaign, particularly if we're going to be in a primary.
And I would assume, like all other campaigns, that the messaging was informed by the polling data that you had.
Well, just as a point of clarification, Congresswoman, we didn't do any polling data for the first approximately 15 months of the campaign.
My time has expired, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Time of the gentlelady has expired. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania.
Thank you. Mr. Lewandowski, one of the major concerns raised by the special counsel's report is that the president has had a pattern of witness tampering conduct. So let's look at some facts. We know that Attorney General Sessions was a witness in the special counsel's investigation because of his role on Trump's campaign, right?
If that's in the report, I don't know that to be accurate.
Well, that's why Sessions recused himself. So you've confirmed today that the president dictated a message for you to give to Attorney General Sessions about what he should say about Russian contacts with the Trump campaign, correct?
In general, that's accurate, yes.
So you told the special counsel that the president scripted what he wanted Sessions to say in a public speech as if it were Sessions' own words about his knowledge of the Russian contacts with the campaign, right?
That seems to be an accurate representation.
Okay. And that isn't the only time that the president tried to influence witness testimony, according to the special counsel's report. White House counsel Don McGahn told the special counsel, and I think we have a slide on this, and I see you've found your copy of the Mueller report, so if you want to follow along, it's volume 2, page 123. The president discussed with aides whether and in what way former campaign chairman or manager, whatever he is, Manafort, might be cooperating with the special counsel's investigation, and whether Manafort knew any information that could be harmful to the president. The special counsel concluded that, and we have another quote, and again, if you want to follow along, it's volume 2, page 132, evidence concerning the president's conduct toward Manafort indicates that the president intended to encourage Manafort to not cooperate with the government. Did the president ever try to discourage you from cooperating with the special counsel, Mr. Lewandowski?
I can't speak to any private conversation I may or may not have had with the president, other than to say I've always been told to tell the truth.
Okay, so you're not going to tell us today whether or not he encouraged you not to cooperate with the special counsel?
I've never been instructed to do anything but tell the truth.
Now, Congressman Ratcliffe asked what you knew about the president dangling pardons to some of his employees, and you mentioned Manafort, you mentioned Gates, there's also Flynn and Cohen. And the president and his counsel have suggested that pardons might be forthcoming for those folks. One of the reasons you're here today is that the Mueller report identified you as a participant in the president's attempts to limit or shut down the Department of Justice's investigation of Russia's sweeping interference in our 2016 election. Has the president ever offered you a pardon?
Again, the White House has directed not to disclose the substance of any discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch confidentiality.
Okay, we've seen the letters, so you're not going to answer whether or not the president has offered you a pardon.
Ma'am, it's not my privilege, and I'm respecting the White House's direction.
My time, thank you. On the same day that you were subpoenaed to appear before this committee, August 15th, the president did indicate that he's going to support your Senate campaign, didn't he?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Well, I just want to know for the record that when Mr. Lewandowski asked for the committee to give him a little break about an hour and a half, 2 hours ago, he took the time during that recess to launch his Senate campaign website with a tweet. And I think that fact says an awful lot about the witness's motivation to appear here today, and I've heard enough. I yield back.
The gentlelady from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too want to clarify for the record that I think earlier you said that Democrats in this committee, perhaps the Democrats, hate this president more than they love their country. That simply is not true. You're looking at someone that loves her country, and more importantly, as a judge, I've taken an oath of office more than once to uphold the Constitution laws of this country. And I take this work of this committee very seriously. And I would hope that you, as a former peace officer, would do the same and show more respect to this committee and the work that we're undertaking. Having said that, Mr. Lewandowski, you agree that if anyone does try to meddle with U.S. elections, they should go to jail, right?
I do.
I know there's a clip of you saying that. We can run the clip.
Now, if other people who were operating outside the realm of what their responsibilities were trying to coordinate to materially impact the outcome of an election, and if they did that, I hope they go to jail for the rest of their lives, because our democracy is too important to play with.
I agree with that statement, and I know that on July 27, 2016, when you were still regularly communicating with Trump publicly called for Russia to find missing Clinton emails by stating on July 27th.
Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing.
So, Mr. Lewandowski, let's be very clear. In that speech, the president was suggesting publicly to the whole world that Russia should hack Hillary Clinton's emails. And it got even worse. After his statement, Russia did hack his opponent's emails, as he asked them to. And when WikiLeaks released those emails, Mr. Trump tweeted how great it was. He said at the campaign appearances in October and November of 2016, this just came out, WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks. He said that in Pennsylvania in 2016, October. This WikiLeaks is like a treasure trove. He said that in Minnesota in October of 2016. He had said in Ohio, boy, I love reading those WikiLeaks. And I believe all those quotes were also there for you to see. So again, let's be clear. This is then candidate Trump tweeting congratulations to Russia and WikiLeaks for stealing documents from U.S. citizens. And I think, if it could get worse, it did. Multiple individuals have testified under oath that Mr. Trump, in fact, knew about the release of these stolen emails prior to the release. I'm going to read you these quotes. Witnesses testified under oath that, quote, Trump privately sought information on future week releases. That's in the Mueller report, volume 2, page 77. The slide's up there for you to see. Deputy Campaign Manager Rick Gates told the special counsel that he, quote, was with Trump on a trip to an airport, and you can't read too much of it because it's redacted, but it said, and shortly after the call ended, Trump told Gates that more releases of damaging information would be coming. He knew it. He said it'll be coming, which turned out to be true. That's in volume 2 at page 18. So if the screen is up, the shot is up there. So in fact, the White House redacted some of the information in the report, and you saw those redactions on the screen. So there could actually be more in those redactions. The president's personal attorney, Michael Cohen, testified to Congress this past February under oath that, quote, Mr. Trump from Roger Stone in advance about the WikiLeaks. And you've got the slide there showing us exactly what the testimony reflects. Roger Stone has been charged with serious federal crimes for his conduct during the campaign. In his indictment, it also says that, quote, Stone was contacted by senior Trump campaign officials to inquire about future releases by WikiLeaks. Stone thereafter told the campaign about potential future releases, and that's in the indictment, and I have a copy here if you wish to see it. So again, to be clear, Roger Stone has known the president for years. They've been longtime friends. Did you say, quote, and here's the screenshot from CNN, Roger Stone's history with Donald Trump goes back, he's 20 years. He's been someone who has known then Mr. Trump and worked with him through business dealings long before we ever started a political campaign. So the fact is that he stole materials, he encouraged the hacking, and don't you think that's doing what you said no one should do? And if they do, that they should go to jail for the rest of their lives?
I stand by my statement that anybody who attempted to materially impact the outcome of an election should go to jail for the rest of their lives.
The president should go to jail for doing what I just reiterated outlined in my statement.
I didn't say that, ma'am.
Well, it seems to me that even this president needs to be held accountable because no one is above the law. And I agree with you that if someone does interfere with our elections, they should go to jail, including this president, if necessary.
Gentlelady yields back. The
Yield back.
gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Lewandowski, I'd like to get back to something that an exchange that you had with Mr. Cicilline and Mr. Jeffries. We've talked a great deal today about the message that the president asked you to deliver to then Attorney General Jeff Sessions. And as you've testified today, and you've informed the special counsel as well during the special prosecutor's investigation, you, quote, stored the notes in a safe. Right? And as you'll see on the slide there, quoting directly from the special counsel's report, which you described to the special counsel as the standard procedure for sensitive items. But that was your standard procedure. That is not normal protocol for official White House documents. My colleague mentioned this earlier, but since you're not a White House employee and have not been, as you've testified, I'll remind you again that the White House has a legal protocol to follow for official documents. As you'll see on this next slide, this screen is a memo from this White House, Donald Trump's White House, about the Presidential Records Act. So the president is well informed about the record requirements for our commander-in-chief. And as you'll see on this slide, under the PRA, the White House must preserve and maintain all memos, letters, notes, emails, and written communications from the president, just like the note that he dictated to you. And of course, those notes are not supposed to be kept in a secret safe in his former campaign manager's house. And so it's clear, I think, to folks who read special counsel's report that is why the president asked you. He wanted this message to be hidden, and he knew you wouldn't keep a record. In fact, you took it out of the White House after Ms. Hicks typed it up and stored it in your personal safe. Now, I want to give you an opportunity to just confirm this. In your exchange with Mr. Swalwell, you talked a bit about the notes that you dictated from the president, and in the special counsel's report, it makes clear on page 91, the last sentence of the second paragraph, that when you met with the president, this was, quote, the first time the president had asked Lewandowski to take dictation, and Lewandowski wrote as fast to make sure he captured the content correctly. That sentence cites your interview with the special counsel. In your exchange with Mr. Swalwell, you contradicted that. And so I'm trying to figure out that discrepancy. Was this, in fact, the first time that you had been asked by the president to take dictation?
To be clear, the words that are written in this report are not my words. That's the representation of a summary of my conversation with the special counsel. And I can say that I have on numerous occasions been directed by the president to write specific information down and deliver that.
So, to that end, Mr. Lewandowski, have you turned over those notes? Were those notes turned over to the special prosecutor?
I've complied with all requirements of the special counsel.
I appreciate you saying that. I'll ask the question again. Did you turn over any other notes that had been dictated to you by the president to the special prosecutor outside of this note that's referenced in the report?
I've complied with all requirements of the special counsel.
So the record will reflect that you won't answer that particular question. And I think that's an important one for this committee to get to the bottom to. Because ultimately, what you are saying is that the special counsel's statement in this report is incorrect. And if that is the case, this committee has an obligation to ascertain the contents of those other notes that you've described. I just want to go back to the message that was delivered to you by the president to tell the Attorney General that if he did not meet with you, you should tell him that he was fired. That's on volume 2, page 93. You're aware, there's a slide that will pop up here. You can see it in front of you. I know that you're aware that the Attorney General is a cabinet level position, correct?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
And he is, in fact, the head of the Department of Justice. He's the chief law enforcement officer in the United States. You knew that you couldn't fire the Attorney General, correct?
Yeah, I can't fire anybody.
Yeah, and as you told Mr. Priebus, as the next slide attests, you told the chief of staff at that time, what can I do? I'm not an employee of the administration. I'm a nobody. So if that's the case, it again is pretty clear to anyone who reads the special counsel's report that the reason the president was delivering this message to you was so that you could scare the Attorney General into complying with the directive that he had given you. He enlisted you to dictate a secret message, which you store in your personal safe at home, for the Attorney General, and then he tells you to tell the chief law enforcement officer of the United States that if he won't meet with you, a private citizen, that he would be fired. At the end of the day, we know it's because the president didn't want anyone investigating.
We've heard that quite a bit this afternoon. And we know that's a serious crime. You even said so, and I definitely agree with you. In fact, the special counsel's investigation resulted in criminal indictments of more than a dozen defendants. That included guilty pleas and indictments of top Trump campaign officials. These guilty pleas include multiple charges of conspiracy against the United States and lying and misrepresenting statements to the Department of Justice officials. But it also included indictments of criminal charges against 13 individual Russian nationals and 3 Russian entities, primarily for conspiracy to defraud the United States. Is that correct, Mr. Lewandowski?
I believe that's what that says, yes.
Thank you. You agree, and you've actually said so today, that anyone, whether it's a Trump campaign official or Russian individuals and entities, anyone who attacks our elections should be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law, correct?
I do agree with that.
Thank you. I agree too. So to be very clear, the special counsel uncovered serious crimes by over a dozen individuals, including Russian nationals, for conspiracy against the United States. I'm a representative of Georgia, and I'm very concerned with protecting our elections. Georgia has actually actively been targeted for election interference by the Russians. Unsealed indictments from the Mueller investigation showed that Russian operatives visited websites for Cobb and Fulton counties. Both of those reside within my own district, looking for vulnerabilities that they might be able to exploit. And you have said, not once, but several times, and I quote, trying to coordinate to materially impact the outcome of the election, that if they did that, I hope they go to jail for the rest of their lives because our democracy is too important to play with. Mr. Lewandowski, those are your words. You've continued to stand by that. And as I've said today earlier, I agree. Our democracy is simply too important to play with. So I'm glad that we're investigating. And I'm glad that we are holding accountable anyone who will attack our elections. And that's why Special Counsel Mueller's investigation was so vitally important. It exposed people attacking our elections in Georgia and throughout the country. And that is an issue that should never divide us among partisan lines. So we have to make sure that we are protecting our 2020 elections at all costs. Every American deserves the right to vote, and we must protect that right at all costs. Because democracy is, as you have said today, too important to play with. And I will yield the balance of my time to Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. I want to thank Mr. Lewandowski for being here today and answering these questions for many hours. With respect to Mr. Michael Cohen, he communicated regularly with Mr. Trump during the campaign. Is that correct?
There was regular communication, yes.
And I want to read from paragraph 7B of Mr. Cohen's federal indictment, which states, Cohen asked Individual 1 about the possibility of Individual 1 traveling to Russia in connection with the Moscow project, and to ask a senior campaign official about potential business travel to Russia. The senior campaign official Mr. Cohen references is yourself. Is that correct?
Could be.
Mr. Cohen testified before the House Oversight Committee on February 27th. It's on the screen in front of you. He testified specifically that that senior advisor was yourself. I'll skip to the end. Congressman DeSagne asked who was the campaign official, and Mr. Cohen responded, quote, Corey Lewandowski. Now, more importantly, Mr. Cohen said to the special counsel that he discussed with candidate Trump the subject of traveling to Russia during the campaign, and that Trump, quote, indicated a willingness to travel to Russia, unquote. That's volume 1, page 78. Mr. Cohen then testified before that Trump was Individual 1. It's on the screen in front of you. Is that correct?
That's what Mr. Cohen testified to.
Looking at the indictment, again, we can now fill in the blanks. Mr. Cohen asked Individual 1, candidate Trump, and a senior campaign official, you, about traveling to Russia. Mr. Chair, may I take my regular 5 minutes at this time? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. During your time as campaign manager, you communicated regularly with the president. Is that correct?
Within candidate Trump, yes, sir.
In fact, you said you sat next to him for, quote, thousands of hours while you were campaign chairman. During your time as campaign manager, did you ever have a conversation with candidate Trump about his campaign team having contact with Russians?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
The special counsel's report includes emails from George Papadopoulos. He sent to you asking about Mr. Trump traveling to Russia. Mr. Cohen also asked you about traveling to Russia per his indictment. Carter Page emailed you about Trump speaking at an event in Russia. And in your thousands of hours speaking with the president, you never mentioned any of these people emailing you, asking you about Trump traveling to Russia. Is that your testimony here today?
I don't recall ever having a conversation with Mr. Trump about traveling to Russia.
What about after the time that Trump was elected? Did you ever discuss with the president his knowledge of his campaign's interactions with Russians?
Again, at the advice of White House counsel, I can't answer questions that would be privileged, and I respect that privilege.
Mr. Lewandowski, of course, was never a White House employee. I know it's been asked before, but I'm going to ask again, Mr. Chairman. I have a parliamentary inquiry. Is this an appropriate assertion?
The gentleman will state his parliamentary.
Is this an appropriate assertion of privilege?
This is most certainly not an appropriate assertion of privilege for the reasons I stated before. Certainly, there's no conceivable privilege for any time period before the president was president.
To be clear, the White House apparently is directing you not to answer whether the president knew about his campaign communicating with Russia just after Russia had attacked our elections. I think the American people want to know and are frustrated today. What, in fact, are you hiding? In Mr. Cohen's federal indictment, it named Mr. Trump as knowing about campaign's communications with Russia. Again, did you ever discuss this fact with Mr. Trump?
Again, to the best of my knowledge, during our campaign, I never had a conversation with Mr. Trump about any contacts with Russia.
The president is named as individual one in a criminal case by his former personal attorney. You're asking us to believe that you never discussed with the president this fact in all of your thousands of hours of conversations.
Again, Congressman, to the best of my knowledge, I don't recall ever having a conversation with candidate Trump about any interaction with Russia.
Mr. Cohen's indictment also states that candidate Trump directed Mr. Cohen to make payments to certain individuals beginning in October of 2016 in order to prevent those individuals from telling negative stories about candidate Trump. During the fall of 2016, at the time of these payments, did you ever discuss with candidate Trump these payments?
To the best of my knowledge, I never had a conversation about those payments.
And what about after the time that Mr. Trump was elected? Did you ever have a conversation with him about those payments?
The White House has directed that I not disclose any conversations or the substance of those discussions with the president or his advisors to protect executive branch privilege.
To be clear, you're being told that you're not allowed to answer whether the president told you that he directed his personal lawyer to make illegal payments.
I'm simply going at the direction of the White House. It's not my privilege to waive, Congressman.
To be clear, the White House is telling you not to answer whether you discussed potential crimes with the president of the United States. Mr. Lewandowski, it's clear to me that the president...
Gentlemen, yield for a moment.
Please.
I believe the Nixon case established the very ironclad principle that discussions regarding criminal acts are not privileged. So there's no possibility of a privilege with respect to the question of whether you were asked about criminal activities. I yield.
Mr. Lewandowski, it's clear to me that the president, the campaign, and yourself did not want the American people to know about any campaign contact with Russia. You lied to cover it up. You lied when you publicly said, quote, nothing about Russia. Multiple senior campaign members were regularly communicating with you about traveling to Russia, meeting with Russians, and even Mr. Trump possibly going to Russia. There's documentation that contradicts your denials, including emails with you personally. This committee, our committee, will not let anyone, not the President of the United States, not anyone, to hide the truth of the American people any longer. No one is above the law. I yield back.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman will state his point of order.
Mr. Chairman, the refusal by Mr. Lewandowski to answer the questions about whether he had discussions with the president about payments from personal lawyer to those payments from the personal lawyer, or whether he had discussions with the president about knowledge of the campaign's interactions with Russia, are not protected. And I would ask, as the chairman reconsiders whether to hold Mr. Lewandowski in contempt as he goes forward from this hearing, it's important to note that the White House directed Lewandowski not to discuss the substance of conversations about official government matters. The White House counsel is here. If the chairman would like to ask them whether they assert that those discussions about Russia or personal payments are official government business, they can be asked. Otherwise, certainly as you consider and you weigh whether to hold Mr. Lewandowski in contempt, you should consider those.
It is certainly the case. I'm not going to ask White House counsel. It is certainly the case that conversations about criminal actions are not official White House business, without question. And I will give Mr. Lewandowski, in light of this ruling, the opportunity to answer that question again.
Mr. Chairman, while he's doing that, I have a parliamentary inquiry.
Gentlemen.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I'm not an attorney, and I had to continue at the advice of White House counsel, and you're welcome to take this matter up with them. But I've drawn the line of having private conversations with the President of the United States during the transition or his time as presidency. I've been very candid and open about answering all questions about the campaign, and I will continue to do so. But at the direction of the council, they have exerted executive privilege of which is not mine to waive.
I will then simply observe on the record that the White House has claimed privilege with respect to the question of possible criminal activity or instructions for criminal activity by the President of the United States.
Mr. Chairman, parliamentary inquiry.
The gentleman will state his parliamentary inquiry.
In light of the discussion just now and the gentleman's from Florida's long question, was there ever a doubt in this committee that we were not trying to find a way to hold him in contempt? Was there ever a doubt today from the start of this that we were ever trying not to hold him in contempt? With that way this is
proper parliament.
It's not a parliamentary inquiry.
The time of the gentleman has expired. The witness has requested a brief recess. Accordingly, the committee will take a 5-minute recess. The committee stands in recess.
This House Judiciary Committee hearing is currently in a short break, but members return shortly to continue hearing testimony on possible obstruction of Robert Mueller's investigation by President Trump. Corey Lewicki, the president's former campaign manager, started testifying about 1 p.m., and he'll continue answering questions when the hearing returns. Until then, a short portion